So, Rosemary, thank you for agreeing to speak with me for this real interesting discussion. We've known each other for a number of weeks, and I find what you're doing professionally as really inspiring. And to discuss with you conversations that are in relation to STEM, I think would be very powerful for up and coming professionals to establish themselves in the scene, hear your story, what your thoughts are. So with everything, you know, I'm the type of person who likes to go in hard with a question to get you thinking immediately. I'm not going to spare any horses with you this afternoon. I'm going to go in the exact same way, if you don't mind, by asking, as an opening question, as a person of colour, what does today's world of STEM look like through your eyes, Rosemary?
Oh yes, you wasn't joking. Straight into it.
Straight in.
No, that's a really good question, Stephen. And I think there's a few responses I have for that. I think first, initially, right now, through my eyes as a woman of colour, I do see mass opportunity and mass potential and possibilities. And I think that's just me being the optimistic person that I am. And it's great to see, you know, so many different initiatives, whether it's government, academic wise, just helping to drive and back the increase of, you know, women in STEM, women of color in STEM, and just, you know, just like what you're doing as well, Stephen. It's fantastic to see. However, I will still say that there's still some way to go. Through my eyes, I've come a long way in my career. And when I say a long way to go, I'm talking specifically for the younger generations, the younger professionals who are just starting out a career or who's just still in uni. I think representation is so important, and we need to see people who look like us in different spaces, in different fields, including STEM. Because when you see, if I had seen someone who looks like me, you know, back in the day before I started my career, it would have made a world of a difference. And I think people overlook the importance of that sometimes. Just seeing someone who looks like you, who may be from where you are, makes a world of a difference to a young person who's considering what they want to do with their lives. And just seeing you in that position just kind of tells them they can do it too, or that at least the possibilities there.
Yeah. That's great. I'm going to ask at this junction, who was the inspiration for you when you got started?
This is a really good, interesting story. So I actually have a very unique entry pathway into the industry.
Okay.
So I actually studied law in university, graduated from law school. I always wanted to be a lawyer, and that's what I was going to do. And as you do, graduate and you decide, maybe not.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the person who was like that person for me who inspired me was actually my younger brother. He is a scientist, and he was working for a company back then. And I was still on the fence. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And he just one day said to me, there's an opportunity at my company, come over, apply, have a look. And I'm like, what is this? And he said, we work in clinical trials and clinical research. And at that point, I didn't know much about the industry at all, if I'm being honest. I knew a few bits from the media or, you know, but not really in terms of what you can do in clinical research in the industry of the pharmaceutical industry. I didn't know much about it until I started there. So it was my brother actually who inspired me and who brought me on board. And I actually haven't looked back since.
Does he know that he was your inspiration?
Yes, he does. He doesn't let me forget it.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then, you know, thinking about that as well, your upbringing, let's go a little bit further back to, you know, little Rosemary. You know, what was that journey like to get to where you just mentioned regarding your brother and, you know, introducing you to the world of pharmaceuticals and life science?
Sure, absolutely. So for me, you know, I'm London born and bred. I have amazing parents. They're Nigerian parents. That's my background. And for anyone who's from the same or similar culture as me, you can definitely relate. You go to university, definitely without a doubt, and you're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, an accountant, one of those, right?
Okay.
I chose to be a lawyer.
Okay.
And I actually do feel quite privileged because I had that support from home in terms of going to uni and having, you know, the opportunity to do so. But, you know, I grew up in East London and I went to public school, and in school, people like me don't grow up to go and work in the pharmaceutical industry and have thriving careers. They go and do other things, or you don't hear about that in school. Actually, when we had career days or career work weeks, you just never hear. I've never heard about clinical research or the pharmaceutical industry as a youngster. When they spoke about science, it was pretty much to do if you was going to be a nurse or a doctor. And I went to an all-girls school. So back then, I had no idea this existed, so I couldn't even consider. And that's why I went down, you know, the legal route, because that's what I thought I wanted to do, right? My parents told me it's a good idea, so I went with it. But luckily, my brother, who actually wanted to be a doctor, he went to university, studied all the sciences in the world,
Yeah.
and went down that route. And that's how he got opened through, it was an apprenticeship scheme that he did. That's
Okay.
how he got introduced into the industry and worked his way up. And I did a similar thing. So I started entry level because I knew nothing, right?
Yeah.
And I did every role going. I learned so much, self-educated, and I had loads of mentors and allyships. But I'm sure we'll talk about that in a bit more
Yeah.
detail.
Yeah. There's a lot of parallels actually with that story and my own, to be transparent. You know, I went to an all-boys school, similar to you. You know, in science lessons, you're taught about the equation for photosynthesis.
Yep.
You don't know about directors of quality assurance or regulatory affairs or what governing bodies are within life sciences. There's obviously a reason for that. Well, when I was growing up anyway. And, you know, similar to what you've just said, there were no people that looked like me, you know, within the sciences or, you know, were engineered in terms of the discussions through the careers weeks, the career fairs, to knowing and understanding more about the STEM or the sciences specifically. You mentioned and you spoke about, you know, that lack of people, lack of representation that look like yourself. Thinking about that, as well as your journey to where you are now, what barriers have you faced in your career, you know, and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. Barriers multiple, if I'm being honest. I think the biggest barrier that I experience is more of the stereotypes placed with a woman who looks like me, a woman of color, in the industry initially, just in terms of the way I looked, I was stereotyped, things I said, and it was actually quite interesting because there's so many different things that happened, right? You're working for a big company, and I'm quite an analytical person. And I look at things quite holistically, and I noticed I was being treated differently. I was treated differently. If I was in a meeting, for example, I'm going to give you some examples here. If I was in a meeting, and we were discussing, you know, things to do with work, and I look at a colleague's response, a colleague who was white, right, to a certain question, I noticed if I answered the same question in a certain way, the response was different in the room. To the point, Stephen, where I've been accused of being aggressive, and I'm not an aggressive person at all.
No
right.
way.
Let's talk about exactly.
Not you, Rosemary. No way.
Let's talk about this word aggressive that's used quite loosely sometimes in any industry against women of color. It's a term that's really hurtful, and people don't realize that. Because what actually happened was I went through a phase in my career where I almost silenced myself a little bit so that I wouldn't be called aggressive. And it wasn't being aggressive, I was asserting myself and I was basing things on facts. But, you know, based on stereotypes and microaggressions, it did impact a stage of my career. And I had to, it was through my mentors and family and friends who helped me actually kind of grow out of that phase and become into my own, and just encourage me to bring myself more to my career, to my work. And honestly, when I did that, I actually did notice I did a lot more better as well.
Yeah, yeah. The word aggression and aggressive is very damaging to an individual, any individual. And you're right, there's lots of stereotyping, tokenisms, things like that, which unfortunately are associated to a number of women in your situation, who've come, gone, and are going through currently, which is obviously a massive shame. And you're right, I believe anyway, there's a difference between assertive and strong-minded or strong-willed, or trying to at least be heard, versus the aggressive, aggressive cancer. It makes it sound like it's something which is, terminal,
Right.
But I hear you. And I think what you've said, it kind of leads really well into the next question I want to ask, and that's about your identity. We can see you're a Black woman who is from London to Nigerian heritage, as you've said. You've spoken about thinking about silencing yourself. So what is STEM's role in shaping your identity as a person of color? What do you think that is?
Wow, that's a tough question, to be honest. When I look back now, I have had the privilege of building a great career. I've worked in the clinical trials pharmaceutical industry for over 10 years. And I've had the privilege of working on some amazing projects in recruiting trial participants for multiple biotech and pharmaceutical companies, really changing the world, getting drugs to market faster. And with that, confidence has grown, and I've grown many skills, analytical skills. We're talking about STEM, mathematical skills, because a lot of what I do is in the feasibility and probability area. So there's that, and there's the science part of things as well. But I think in terms of my identity, and if I could talk to where I am today, because of my learnings, because of my experience in the industry, it's actually built me into a person who really wants to give back a lot more, because of my experience and the way that my career was eventually shaped. I'm a massive advocate for driving, as you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion in clinical trials. There's a major gap in the industry between the drugs that are being developed versus the people that they tested drugs on. So there's a lot of mass work to do there, and I use my platform and us as a company, we are very passionate about improving and changing that. And then also looking further afield into emerging markets where they've just been left behind, so markets such as Africa, where there's mass opportunity to drive, further development there. Because essentially what we're trying to do is ensure better healthcare outcomes for everybody, all of us. This is not just a black and white thing. And I think being in the industry, working in the industry, seeing the data, being able to analyze the gaps, that's what's been, helped me open my eyes to see, where the needs are, where the gaps are, and what we need to do to improve that, and talk about that a lot more, and work towards that kind of like common goal. And then in terms of just giving back and just that spirit of giving back, I mentor people, just anything I can do to just help the next generation, just elevate them into the industry as well. Because you'd be surprised, I do mentor at the moment as well, and there are still youngsters in university who do not know much about, especially like the clinical research industry and the roles and the possibilities there. So I do a lot of work to really open their minds to that.
Yes, absolutely. That's great. For those who aren't aware of who you are, it's still in relation to the same question of how STEM has shaped your identity. Can you just list some of the job titles that you've had without telling us what you're doing currently?
Okay, yeah, sure. So let's start from the beginning. So at very entry level, I was a patient recruitment and retention specialist. And that type of role involves, understanding study protocols, understanding study design, and really communicating with trial participants who are going to or want to participate in a clinical trial. and also supporting the hospitals or the sites who are conducting the clinical trials. There's a lot of quality assurance that's involved there, and data management that's involved in that. And I've done project management roles as well. I have been director of feasibility analysis, director of diversity inclusion, patient recruitment and retention. So many roles.
Just a few jobs. Just
a few jobs. Like, I'm going to stop now.
Just a few. And what is your title and what are you doing now?
Absolutely. So currently I am the founder and CEO at ACORN IQ. It's a company that I founded myself, co-founded with my co-founder, Eddie. And what we do is we're still in the same area of clinical trials, patient recruitment retention, but we specialize in the recruitment of participants from underrepresented populations for clinical trials, and also driving clinical research across new and emerging markets, such as Africa. We work with clinical trial sites across Africa in delivering clinical trials. And it's an amazing new world that we're going to, but there's a massive need there because Africa as a continent has been left behind research for so long. So I'll give you some statistics. Out of all the trials that happen worldwide, only 2% of trials are conducted in Africa. And that's a missed opportunity, of course. So yeah, we're working with sites, amazing sites across Africa who have the skills, who have the know-how, the ability to conduct trials. And we're hoping to also increase trials outside of infectious diseases, because the majority of trials conducted in Africa is in infectious diseases like tuberculosis, HIV, and things like that. We're looking at driving trials in the non-communicable disease area, such as heart disease, diabetes, kidney disease, cancer. A lot of people are dying of cancer in Africa. So yeah.
Brilliant. And how long has it been up and running for?
So we're fairly new, but not new. But we've been running for the last 6 months so far officially. Yeah.
Right. And, the reason why I ask what you've done historically versus what you've done now in regards to shaping your identity, this must be a whole different challenge, compared to what you've had to go through previously. What have you learned over the last 6 months about yourself?
Right. So that's a really good question and segue into that. I think the most important thing is having that self-confidence in yourself. I know my stuff, and that's what I wasn't too confident in, earlier in my career. But you come to a point where you are very confident that at least you know your stuff very well. Right? That's really important, because if you believe in yourself and you're sure that you know your stuff, then no one can take that away from you. No matter what stereotype or microaggressions made against you, you can at least know that, well, at least I know my stuff. And when I say know my stuff, I know my industry in and out very well. I'm an expert in my field, and I've worked very hard, to get to this point. And you also have to be quite, bold. It's a bold statement, me starting my own company. I've worked for some amazing companies over the years. I've learned a lot. And I've also found, an avenue that I would like to grow and contribute towards the world. So you could see the pattern that's grown. It's a certain confidence that I've, built over the years to get me to this point, to be able for me to form the company.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Thinking about your career, being employed by an organisation, and now where you are being co-founder, I want to explore tokenism. I can only understand and appreciate, number one, the fact that you're a woman. You might have experienced a number of things. What's your initial feelings actually when I mentioned the word tokenism? And to see you smiling there, look at the heavens.
That's a very interesting word. It's something.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut up, but you've been a D&I head. You are somebody who's currently working in industry, walking and living, and this is why I asked the question.
Yeah.
What's your initial feeling?
Yeah, tokenism does exist. It is a thing. And when I think about tokenism, I actually have used a different way to describe it as optics.
Okay.
And
Why is that?
Well, for me, in my experience, maybe this is the best way I could describe it. I have been invited to certain events or tables as a result of the way I look, which is quite interesting. So it's, the way I look has worked both good and bad for me. But it's not good if you think about it, because I want a seat at the table because I deserve to be at the table, not because of what I look like. Yeah. And I say optics because I'm literally there because I'm a Black woman, and maybe it's an all white panel and they need to break this up and make it look a bit more representative. So I'll be called there. So that's why I say more, I use the term optics because I know certainly myself and friends and colleagues, we talk about this quite openly. We do feel that there's been certain times that we've been used for optics, and this role that you mentioned, DE&I, it was a role that I really enjoyed. And I noticed, unfortunately, obviously, past the killing of George Floyd and COVID, there were a lot of roles that came about in the DE&I space in terms of driving diversity and inclusion in just across the world, in all industries. And I wondered and I questioned, well, is this another optics tactic? Is this genuine? Is this companies? And of course, following that, we know that there are many companies who are genuine and who are working really hard to drive diversity and inclusion in their workplaces, in their industry, across customers. And then there are some who, unfortunately, it was an optics practice, or as you would call it, tokenism.
Yes. Okay. That's a good way of explaining the optics side of things. You said that you've experienced that, you've been the only Black woman or Black person on a panel because quite blatantly people feel that they need to break up the look, and it could be the tick box exercise. I was speaking to another D&I consultant maybe about 6 months ago, and I'm keen to get your thoughts on this. She explained to me that she was asked to work with an organization where, she didn't really feel they were bought in to really change. She felt that she was being asked to come in and given her all this money to tick that box.
Yeah.
There's good and there's bad, as you've mentioned, for positive and the negative. What's your thoughts on that? Can you make a difference, a positive impact for what initially is being presented as the tick box, the token piece of it?
Yeah, I think the only way you can actually make change is if the organization that you're working with allow you to have the power to make change.
Okay.
That's really important, because what's happened a lot of the time is a lot of people in those roles have been in there, really, really tried to change things around, improve things through policies, and you name it, but they don't have the power to actually activate those and implement those changes. And if you can't do that, then you can't change anything. And that's when it just becomes a tick box exercise. And people have to understand the work, the passion that goes into, trying to make changes. It's not easy, and it's quite demoralizing when you've done all that work and then it comes to nothing, basically. So can they actually make change? Yes, subtly. Even if you change the mindsets of your colleagues or staff members, at least you've done that. But in terms of the longitudinal changes, that only comes when you're giving the power to be able to actually implement and action those changes for the long run. And if you can't do that, then it will be very short-lived, unfortunately. That's just my opinion. It will be very short-lived. So we need these companies, we need companies to allow and give access, the power to actually action the change and to collect the data to be able to, to analyze if there's actually been any change over, a term.
Yeah. I'm a strong believer personally, even if it's 1.1% of changing someone's mindset, you've done some good work, you know, because, you know, the mustard seed can grow, you know, a rice grain will grow, you know, everything will grow, and hopefully, you know, can make an impact. You know, so that's interesting to hear what you think on that. Tokenism, microaggressions. The microaggressions seems to be something which I hear a lot of people that are speaking about. People of color and people who, you know, are white as well, to be quite honest with you. Their interest in microaggression, looking at it from both sides, the learning piece as well as the how to not show, you know, that to people of color. Have you ever experienced any microaggressive experience within the workplace before yourself?
Yes, I actually have, but I just wanted to talk to a point there in terms of when you said, you know, people of color and people who, you know, white people, everyone actually can experience microaggressions.
Yes.
And it's really important to ask the question and pose the question to everybody. It's
Yeah.
something that because I've been a manager, I'm a leader. So, you know, I always like to produce an open, comfortable space that people feel free to talk about anything, really. We talk about these things quite openly. It's very, very important to do so. And just in my past experience, you know, I've gone through microaggressions, yes. And just me asking my colleague, my white colleague, well, have you experienced any microaggressions? It's been yes, right? To my surprise, assuming it's just people who look like me that experience microaggressions, and that's not necessarily true. So that just changed my mindset completely on the topic, on the issue. So when it comes to microaggressions and stereotypes, anything to do with humans, we have to ask everybody actually, because, you know, some of my white colleagues, they told me that they experienced, you know, discrimination based on their hair color, for example, you know, things like that, things that I would never really think about, you know, in that form myself. So that's just one point that I wanted to raise with regards to just posing the question and asking the question to everybody.
Yeah.
And myself, yes, personally, I have experienced microaggressions in the workplace, unfortunately. And it's once again just based on stereotypes, on things that people have seen on TV, and things to do with character. It's a shame, but yeah, I have.
How do you deal with that, Rosemary? How did you deal with it? And if there was something which you weren't happy with in terms of the outcome, what would you do?
Yeah,
should that have happened again?
Yeah. So there was 3 phases I went through, to be honest. The first time I experienced a microaggression, I was in utter shock and disbelief, and almost make an excuse for the individual, that they must not have realized that that's quite an offensive thing to say. So I shouldn't be upset about it. So we started off there. And then the second, you know, phase that I went through is experience a microaggression from a colleague, and actually, no, this doesn't sit well with me. I have to say something to them. And when you say something to them, unfortunately, the response is not what I expected. I'm expecting, oh, sorry, apology, but I've been just, you know, it's been quite a defensive response to my dismay and, you know, just horror, right? Because it's, people don't realize, once again, the damage that microaggressions or, you know, things that people say do sometimes, right? And then the third phase is me just going straight to HR, right? So these are all different phases I went through in my career to get me to be able to actually talk about things openly. And then I got to a place where actually you just enlighten people. People sometimes really generally don't know, and not to make excuses once again, but it's an enlightenment type of job where you just explain to the person why that can actually come across as quite, you know, hurtful or damaging, and they actually don't realize you can have an open conversation about it, and it improves your relationship. I've had those situations as well.
That's the you know, that's the sensitive, educational, clever way, obviously that last one there, I believe anyway, to approach something like that. Mr. or Miss, do you understand that when you say this, it means X, and it makes people feel in this way? Let me offer some advice or help educate. If you want to say this, maybe consider saying it in this way, or ask how. Do you know what I mean? Find the solution.
Yeah.
I think, you know, when you've explain that to that certain individual,
Right.
they still don't want to. That's obviously another issue where
Right.
you could potentially move further up to
Right.
HR and what have you as well. So I like the fact that you brought that to the table here today in terms of.
But I have to say, I also have to say, and just be bluntly honest, that that can also be quite exhausting for the individual as well.
Well,
That is another thing. It's needed and it's great, but it can be quite exhausting when you have to, quite a few times, numerous different times, educate people.
so let me ask a question then. You're absolutely right, because I speak to people all the time, and they say, Steve, the fight is real. The representation, the want to do better is tiring. It's a burden which is heavy on the shoulder, heavy on the heart, and they're tired of trying to, change things. With that being the case, and what you've just said as well, what advice, you've been a manager, you've been a director, you've been head of, what advice would you give to your managers, or heads of, when responding to their employees' experience of microaggressions?
Right. That's a good question. And I think we just need to take it one step back before that. To all the managers and leaders out there, you have to allow and advocate for an open space for people to be able to first come to and be able to bring these issues and topics to fruition. That's what's needed first, right? Because you do have environments where it's not open at all and people do not feel comfortable enough to be able to bring these things up.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to remember people are absolutely different, right, in the way they handle situations. So, in my experience, I've had individuals who slowly introduce their distaste or discomfort for a situation that's arisen or that's happened. And there's other people who are quite blunt and more confident to just come and say, look, this happened. I'm not happy about it. I need to talk to you about it. What can we do? And that's why I said having that open space is very important. And the way that you show that in your work environment is you openly talk about these things. Right? You have to just, it's a simple task of just openly saying that we don't tolerate, we don't tolerate discrimination, we don't tolerate stereotyping and microaggressions, but things do happen. And if they do happen, we want everybody, regardless of your color or anything, to feel free to be able to come and talk to me as a manager about it. And then you have to have policies in place to show that you guys as an organization take it seriously and there's actions in place to actually, deal with situations like that. So it gives, the staff confidence, right, that there's actual practice in dealing with situations such as mine. Because if there is nothing in place, it doesn't give people confidence because it'll pose the question of, well, what's going to happen? What's going to be done? You need to visually show these things and verbally speak up on these issues because they do happen. So that would be my solid advice. If you do that, then people will be able to come forward and they'll be able to talk about these things a lot more and have an open mind as well. Just have an open mind. Sometimes you just need to listen. You don't have to have an answer. You may not know the answer, and that's absolutely fine. Sometimes it's just listening.
Yeah.
Mr. or Miss So-and-so, I've heard you. I'm so sorry to hear that you've gone through this. Show empathy. Show interest in what they're saying.
Yes. Two things I'm taking from what you're saying here is, number one, there's going to be conversations which are very uncomfortable to hear.
Yeah.
That's the fact. However, having the conversations is a step forwards.
Right.
Secondly, to managers out there who you've addressed, I think is great. Taking it even one step back from there, Rosemary, how do you create the space for people to feel comfortable?
Yeah, no, that's a good question.
What were some tips or advice can you offer to those listening to do on that?
Yeah, so you need to make this practice as part of the company culture, your department culture, and I would say company culture overall. I think the problem is people tend to shy away from the topic and not speak on it or bring it up until something happens, and then everyone's reactionary.
Yeah.
You don't want to be reactionary. You want to be proactive in reducing or actually managing these things a lot more. So I would say in terms of how to manage this and provide or build this structure, it needs to be from a cultural standpoint, overall culture, company culture standpoint. And you do that through the company policies. You have a very robust DE&I strategy in the company that outlines, you know, the overall company's ethos is really important, you know, that everyone feels valued and engaged and cared for in the overall company's ethos.
Yeah.
And you speak about this quite regularly, whether it's, you know, annually, and it needs to be updated, right? We don't need policies that's been around for 20 years and you blow the dust off of them. No one's looked at it in a while. And you need to articulate this and verbalize this to to everyone in the company that we are re-looking at things. We are making things better. We are working on it. We are where these things happen. And you speak to this. You talk about the stories, and you give everyone a safe space environment to be able to talk to, whether it's, it could be just, it doesn't even have to be HR sometimes, because what's interesting is, and I'm sure you can agree with this, it's we all have that person, that go-to person, you know, that we can go and talk to about things. And sometimes you have allies within the company that actually are a good resource to, you know, talk about these things and kind of be like, you know, the middleman to help manage things, because these are people who trust. It's all about trust at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think to add to that again, you know, if companies, organizations are struggling with their identity, the policies, you know, the ethos and what they stand for, there's no shame in going external to find consultants or organizations who can help you achieve what you want to stand for, you know, and set up different groups internally, provide statements of work to help show what to do and how to approach things and conversations and topics of discussion, which might be very difficult. So that's great. Coming to the end of the discussion, which is a real shame, maybe we could speak for a long time. And I hope to get you back on another discussion, if that's okay, specifically to discuss your company, actually, and the great work that you're doing there. What is one big change you've noticed since you started your career within STEM?
Yeah, so this is kind of like an oxymoron, honestly, because, you know, on one side I say like there's loads more work to do to encourage people of color, women of color, or just women in general into STEM. But I have to say, one big change is I've seen this whole drive, this influx of women in STEM, which wasn't around. It wasn't even a thing. It wasn't, you know, I wouldn't even refer to it as STEM back in the day when I started my career. So it's great. And that's the biggest change that I've seen. And I have seen a change. I have seen a change and an increase in women, you know, wanting to get involved in bioscience, you know, things like that. So yeah, I would say that's the biggest change so far for me as well.
Good. And last question for now. 3 things you'd like to see when moving towards a future change would be what?
Oh God.
2 things then.
Yeah, let's do 2 things.
2 things
I think for me, it's the obvious in terms of, you know, my passion and where we lie as a business, and it's really important for the betterment of humanity, and that is really to ensure that we need the skills. We need a lot more people in STEM who are representative, because this really will help when, for example, in the drug development industry, when these drugs are being developed, having a diverse, you know, workforce shows success, right? It shows a good business case, and it's important that we have people in these roles who are representative in STEM, because, you know, essentially they will be the people talking to the public about, for example, clinical trials and enrollment, and trying to encourage the public to get more involved. If it doesn't look representative, for us as an industry, we will still have that lag of people wanting to participate because it's just not representative enough. And we need it to be representative, because we need future drugs to be tested and be safe for everyone, right? From just a genetic standpoint. So that would be the first one for me. And the second one for me is driving more opportunities. I'm sorry, I have to. It's just shameless plug. Driving opportunities, you know, in emerging markets such as Africa, because there's just so much opportunities there, honestly, Stephen. And it's just, I can't even begin to explain the possibilities there. So those are the 2 that I would say.
Well, look, we will, if you're happy to, let's have another conversation on
Yes, I think we need to.
The immediate passion of what your company and what you're doing in regards to Africa and the opportunity that will be there in general. Very quickly before we bring this to a close, how can people reach out to you, Rosemary, and see what it is that you're doing from a work perspective?
Absolutely. Well, you can initially get through to me via my LinkedIn page, of course. My name is Rosemary Lakeru. And you can also contact me via our website at www.acorniq.co as well. And if you do want to get direct contact to me, please feel free to contact Stephen, who I give you the permission to share my personal email address.
Oh no, I have to take a charge for it, Rosemary. Yeah, that's no problem at all. That's no problem. Well, listen, it's been roughly 35-40 minutes of a very, very insightful conversation. It doesn't even feel like it's been that long, to be honest with you. And we will arrange another time for us to speak about other matters in regards to the professional side of what you're doing on the day-to-day now. But you know, I want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. You know, I think you represent a number of professionals who are upcoming, who would love to strive to do what you're doing. You represent something for the older generation, you know, looking back to think, oh, wow, you know, I wish I had Rosemary's, you know, tenacity and drive and passion for doing what you do. And, you know, thank you for being open-minded to challenging what clearly wasn't working for you, especially within the clinical trials piece, you know, what you mentioned earlier on, and finding a gap to make a difference, you know, professionally with what you do on a day-to-day, but also from a wider perspective. And I encourage more people like yourself, Rosemary, to get in touch, follow the Race and STEM page, let's connect. That's what this community is about, sharing the positives, sharing the challenges, and you know, we'll make a dent. We will make a dent. But thank you for today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was like great talking to you.
No problem. We'll catch up soon.
Thank you.
All right.